Hi,
Hi,
Mary Margaret.
Sarah.
We're back.
We are back.
We're,
And
we're talking about something a little different this time than just sort of overview of the class, but we really wanted to talk some about conducting live observations. So you've been through your training, you passed your certification, and you're getting ready to go out for the first time.
you might be petrified
Right.
because during the observation training and during your testing, you watched
Video.
and video is really different from live observation.
And video, yeah, exactly. So being in a classroom with moving humans, I like it better. I think it's easier, but we thought we'd kind of walk you through some slides to talk about what to do when you actually go into a live observation.
Yep. All right, and so these are just going to be some tips for live observation. And you'll notice that on the right we've got, or our right, your left, we've got Mary Margaret Gardner, who's out conducting live observations. And one of the things you're going to notice that she's pretty close to a lot of things that are going on there. And we'll talk about where to position yourself because that's an important part of ensuring that you see as much as you can without being intrusive.
Okay, move on. So conducting live observations. So one of the things people want to know about is what happens when you walk into the classroom. So what do you suggest for people?
Well, the first thing I suggest is that you greet the teacher. Ideally, the teacher knows you're coming or not, actually.
Sometimes
it
they
depends.
don't know.
It depends on the purpose. But greet the teacher, tell them you're there to do class observation. And if they're not, if they have a second to step away from the kids and they're not familiar with class observation, just let them know what it's going to be like, that you're going to be there for several hours.
They're going to write a lot of things.
And writing a lot is
Right.
just part of the process. It doesn't mean that they've done anything, they're doing anything wrong.
Right.
And then it's also good to ask the teacher what would be a good place for you to position yourself.
Right.
Sometimes teachers will say, well, there's a chair right over there, and we don't necessarily recommend that you sit. In fact, standing up and moving around can be very beneficial.
Right. You want to kind of follow where the kids are.
Yep.
So the other thing is you want to make sure that you fill out the top information on your score sheet. That's going to help you, especially if you're doing multiple cycles, because you really do forget what happened from one cycle to the other if you're doing 4 to 6 cycles. So make sure that you fill out the ratio, the name of the teacher, the date, the time when you started coding and when you stopped coding. You want to make sure
started observing and stopped observing.
I'm sorry, yes, thank you.
Okay.
And then you also want to make sure that you write down what they're doing. So are they having a meal? Are they doing a social studies lesson, etc.?
Right.
So that's important. Sarah, you mentioned about where to stand. You want to be kind of away. You want to be sort of a fly on the wall, but you're a pretty big fly and there is no wall. Well, there is a wall, but you're not on it. So you want to make sure that you're moving around and that you want to make sure you look around the room and let your eyes float to see what's going on. Yeah. With video, you only see what the camera tells you. In a classroom that's live, you might say, oh, I'm really interested in that group of children over there, and I'm going to make a point of going over there to see what's going on.
Yeah, and in fact, almost everything we're talking about is in chapter 2 of the manual, and so we definitely encourage people to go and review that before they conduct live observations.
In fact, we're going to review that chapter 2, all those important points in just a sec.
Yes, we are. But the manual does say that if there are multiple adults with multiple groups, it suggests, spend time watching one group, then spend time watching another group, and then spend time watching another group. But really, you want to step back with that fly on the wall and then move closer as things of interest happen.
You also want, if there are, let's say it's a center time and there's lots of kids in the classroom and the teachers are moving around, make sure that you try to get around to every center and kind of follow the teachers along. And if there's multiple adults, we'll talk about that in just a second. Make sure that you're taking good notes, that you're taking notes that are going to support your observation, and that they're about the who, what, and how. Right. And not really, we're not looking for what the teachers are not doing. We're just gathering data. We're just getting information. It's just a snapshot. What we do with that information is what it really is, helps teachers become more effective. But we're just getting the basic baseline information. Now, talking about coding protocol, what we kind of went back and forth around the difference between coding protocol and scoring protocol. And we do say coding and scoring kind of interchangeably.
Yeah, people use words interchangeably. But here, what we mean is,
so what we mean is, depending on why you're collecting the data. So in chapter 1, it talks about uses of the class. And in our pre-K manual, it starts on page 6. And why are you there? Are you doing it for supervising? Are you doing it for QRS? There's a lot of reasons for going in to do the protocol. So some places will say, don't go in before 9 o'clock, or some will say, don't go if a teacher hasn't been there 2 weeks, or there needs to be 50% of the children. That is something that you have to decide with the people that you're coding with and the purpose of your coding. And so that's really important. Some places don't do specials and some do. Some people don't do cafeteria, some do. Some people don't go outside at all and some do, depending on if the situation is right. So that's really important. Where you go to actually do your coding, the 10 minutes to score, that's up to you as well. I personally like to stay in the classroom. I become less of a distraction. And I can, if I'm doing 6 cycles and I want to get them done as quickly as possible, I'm going from the room outside, sitting down, coming back, finding my place, that just takes extra time that I don't typically have. However, there are protocols that they say leave the room. So again, no recommendation.
And I will say, recently I was doing some live coding, and the classrooms were fairly tight and loud. Very loud, and the administrator had actually set a chair right outside the door.
That's nice.
And I had let the teacher know that that was what was going to happen, and that worked really well. So it
depends on the situation. And make sure that you're following the correct scoring protocol. And if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us. But that is very important, that you're using your manual, that you're using the face pages, that you're using the descriptors, and you're using figure 2.1 on page 17. It's critical that you do that as well. Don't skip any steps.
Right. And we are talking about the pre-K, so obviously with the toddler, any other age levels, you'll be looking at the appropriate table about that describes.
Right. So it's page 16 in toddler and 14 on pre-K, and I don't. Okay, so points to consider when you're actually in the classroom. So Sarah did mention chapter 2. Chapter 2 is critically important. Read chapter 1, read chapter 2 before you go out in the field. It really does help get your mind around what you're doing, especially if you're on multiple age levels. So you want to observe during all classroom activities. That includes routines, transitions, readings, all of the times during the day. There is a little confusion sometimes about outside. You want to talk about that?
Yes, I will talk about that. And the issue with outside is that if it's recess and the kids are just running around and having a good time, and then we don't observe. However, if it's a structured activity and the teachers are interacting with it, we do observe.
It could be
except in toddler we naturally observe.
Right,
but
and also in infant. But with pre-K, we don't go outside unless there's a planned activity. Now you can walk with them all the way up to the door when they're released.
And I think you should, because it gives you great information about transitions and productivity.
Right.
And how well kids understand routines.
I've been with some coders sometimes, like, well, they said they're going outside, I'm going to stop. I'm like, no, wait until they get outside. And it took almost the whole 20 minutes for the kids to get down the hall, put their coats on and all of that. So that has some really great codable moments. You assign for 10 minutes. That means you do a 20-minute cycle across all the dimensions, and you code for 10 minutes. 10.
Yep.
And then you do that again for 4 to 6 cycles. And you want to get as many cycles as possible. 6 is a lot of cycles, but it definitely gives you more information in terms of reliability.
And I do want to also just make a point here that I really encourage you to take a stopwatch or have a timer on your phone that you use, because it's really easy to get caught up in, oh, this is such fun activity, and you're really watching and you're writing away, and the next thing you know, you've been observing for 25 minutes.
Right. And I put it on silent, and it buzzes me. And I also do it for coding.
Yep. And the same thing.
So here's some things that chapter 2 speaks very specifically about, and something that we'll talk about each point here. And just remember that it is in chapter 2 for all of the age levels. So I'm not going to give a page number, but know that that information is in there. So more than one adult. What do you do when there's 2 or 3 teachers? Where you're going to look at chapter 2 where it talks about what to do with multiple adults. And it's pretty specific there. But basically, you're going to want to try to see who's got the most children and for how long. But when you're coding, you want to make note of that. How long are you watching teacher A? How long are you watching teacher B? Because I've been in classrooms where you don't know who the lead teacher is, and it doesn't, right? So you want to make sure that you look at who's interacting. If you've got a teacher doing circle time and another teacher is over across the room getting snack ready, and that teacher's not interacting with children, I don't consider that teacher's interactions.
Right.
Unless a child maybe goes up and says, "Hey, Miss Sarah, can I help you with lunch?"
Mhm.
Then I'm interested in that
Mhm,
interaction. Of
mhm.
course, it's just one child, but
Right.
it could focus in.
But
So
you're going to note it because you don't know how many other kids are going to run over and say, "Hey,
right.
Miss Sarah, can I help you too?"
And jot down when another adult comes in or goes
Mhm.
out. And you don't know when they're going to come in or go out. When we're training, we know we have the famous lunch lady in pre-K, then she comes in for 2 minutes and 38 seconds or whatever, but you don't know when somebody's
Right.
going to come in or out. So make a note.
Right.
I usually say like the color of their shirt or something. So red teacher came in at
Mhm.
10:15 and the cycle ended at 10:20. So I'm going to know how to weigh those, the effectiveness of those interactions. So what to observe? Again, we've talked about
Yeah.
everything. So sometimes something's going to happen. You're going to have to terminate that cycle. You're going to have to
Right.
stop. So what are some things that you would talk about that would stop a cycle,
So one of the things that would stop the cycle is a fire drill,
right?
and
Something really unexpected.
something unexpected, or it could be that the teacher says, you've looked at the schedule, because ideally before you go out live, you look at the schedule so you can kind of pace, plan around things. You don't want to arrive at a school at 7:45 in the morning and then find out that actually
Kids
that's
don't
when
get there till 9.
well, no, the bus
Right.
gets there at 7:45, but they unload, they go and have cafeteria and the breakfast. I'm sorry, I said that
But you
wrong.
could
Breakfast
code
in the
that. Yeah.
cafeteria. But if it's not codable according
Right.
to your organization's protocol, then you can't code that. And then the next thing you know, they go out for recess. Um,
So
yeah,
there's things that are going to make you terminate a cycle.
right.
Fire drill, something unexpected, something along that line. And the thing is, if you can get 10 minutes of solid data, you can code that. It does not mean that you just go in and do 10 minutes
Right.
all the time. You
Right.
want to get 20,
Mhm.
but if you can get 10 minutes, go ahead and use that data in one of the cycles and then wait until the cycle, until the timing is right to start again.
Right. And typically, if kids are coming in from outdoor play, as soon as they start coming into the
You can start
classroom, you
coding
can
that.
start coding again.
So let's move on to remaining objective. That's hard.
Yes.
So I have a very favorite part in the class manuals in chapter 2, and it's always in the challenges for observers right above the independence of cycles. And it talks about looking for disconfirming evidence. So sometimes you get a feeling about a classroom and you don't even realize that you're having that feeling. And so you want to make sure that you are looking for evidence to disconfirm your initial impression, that halo and horns effect. Remember that cycles are independent. They may have variations across the dimensions, depending on the time of day, the activity, all the things that happen in a typical classroom, but there may not be variation. And you just need to make sure that you're coding that cycle in that time and you don't think about it again. You are not coding until you're done with your 20 minutes.
Right.
And that's really hard because you're like, this is going to be the best classroom ever. And then you
Right.
then you're derailed and then you don't know what to do with that data. So remember, keep it separate, and that's hard.
Yep.
Weighing single incidents. So maybe there's a kid that comes in, Sarah, and starts throwing blocks.
Right.
What are you going to do with that?
Well, I'm going to note it, but I'm going to note it. I'm going to note how long it takes place. I'm going to notice the impact on other kids. I'm going to note how the teacher responds. But if the teacher responds well and it doesn't happen for very long at all, then it's really not that big of a deal, and it's not the average experience of the average child.
You're going to weigh it, but it's not going to pull you to necessarily to a 7 or a 1.
Right. Right.
So here's some questions that people do ask sometimes about live observations.
Mm-hmm.
Should I greet the teacher?
And I talked about that in the beginning. And part of the reason we bring this up is that we got some feedback from a large data implementation that the observers came in and they were stony-faced and they never smiled and they didn't say hello. And it made the teachers feel as if they were doing something wrong and made them uncomfortable.
I always make sure to say thank you so much and
I
hello,
do too.
and my name is so-and-so.
Yeah.
I always tell my name, but you're so-and-so. So, okay. What happens if a kid comes up and approaches you and they want to, talk to you and read a book? I had one like, are you a volunteer? Read me a book. I'm like, oh, gosh, I could.
Yeah, so what did you do?
Well, I said, well, maybe I can read a book later after I'm done with my work. So I try not to make a lot of eye contact, though I find them adorable. I might smile or, wink at a child or something, but if they approach me, I might even walk away.
Right.
Or I'll say, I'm here to write down some things and I have to do my work. And they're usually okay with that. Back to the greeting of the teacher too. Sometimes you can say, do you want to tell the children why I'm here? Mm-hmm. Some classrooms are so well run and they're used to kids coming in and out. It's not an issue.
You mean adults coming in and out?
Yes. And then what you're looking for is kind of let your gaze float a little bit,
Mhm.
so that you don't have like an angry face or a happy face, or
Right.
sometimes you have to kind of giggle behind your manual, but try to let your gaze just be kind of like a flat affect, but not stony. And then like look and watch what's going on. You can see my hand moving around of what's going on in that classroom, so that you can get that picture
Right. And when you're also not making eye contact with the kids, they're much less likely to come
to
up
come
to
up
you.
to you. Yeah.
Um,
What about if you've got behaviors that fit in more than one dimension? What do you do with that?
well, I usually write them down in the first dimension that it
Hmm.
occurs to me, and then when I'm in that 10-minute cycle,
Review them all.
then I review and I'll make arrows.
Yeah.
Or one thing I'll do if I hear an open-ended question is I might put it in language modeling and I'll put an OE
Hmm.
next to it. But then when
It could be a social conversation,
it could be a social
right?
conversation. It could also actually be a
Student,
great analysis and
right?
reasoning question. So then
And
I
you
would
don't
put
know,
that
right?
A and R next to it.
Hmm.
And so then with these silly codes or shorthand that I've come up with, it helps me with that
Right,
placement.
because some things sort in different places, but they're weighed differently.
Right.
So here's one that's really tough. I heard the best open-ended questions during my 10-minute cycle. Why wasn't that teacher saying those things while I was writing down the notes for my 20 minutes? And what I tell people is, look, if that's the only time you hear it, and we're looking at the average experience of a child,
Right.
it's a single incident.
Right.
So it's not going to matter. And if they're going to be able to repeat that, you're going to hear it in 2 or 3 hours.
Right. And similarly, you may hear a teacher threaten a child
Mm-hmm.
during that 10-minute coding period. And that's when, you have to really be like the hear no evil, see no evil,
Yeah.
speak no evil.
Just stay
It just
focused.
didn't happen. Um,
And again, it'll happen again.
right.
And if it only happened once, it's not going to change it. Story away. Challenging behavior. So one of the things we're like, well, they were trying so hard, and it was mealtime. Like, well, what else could they have done? I'm going to give them a little bit more
Right.
credit
Right.
because they were trying so hard.
Yeah.
Not what we're looking
No,
for.
it's just,
Sadly, it's great coaching point, great place to
yes.
step off and say, hey, you did this really great job. But when we have that, we can't make assumptions. So challenging behavior, well, of course that child had clearly was having a bad time, or maybe had some sort of disability, and so what else is that teacher supposed to do? It's really important when you're gathering that data to write down that challenging behavior, because it's the antecedents to how you deal with that behavior. So this data really helps. What time of day was that? What was going on? What was the ratio? And you could talk to that teacher about later on, what did you see that set that child off? So you cannot make any assumptions at
Right.
all.
And you can't make any exceptions. So
Right.
code what you see. And when we think about challenging behavior, it also makes us think about kids who may have an IEP.
Right.
And we do on our website have a paper on recommendations for observing and inclusive
Right.
settings that could be helpful for you.
Somebody wrote. Okay. That is the end of
That's
our
it.
show.
So
Thank you so much
for
for
joining
listening.
us today. And happy coding.